Nigga eating beef.
오늘따라 기분이 꿀꿀해. 안 그런 척해봐도 슬프니. 반응 없는 것 때문에 삐졌는데 네 척시 친구들이 나오라고 부르네. 잠깐만 연락이 이제야 오는 걸 후.
Why you young about to turn that music down?
회의해야 되는데 생내는 또 어디 갔어?
Neighbors like they said.
또 나에게 말을 갔대.
Look at Boogie, nigger.
Alright, what is this? Hate Bus episode 77, I think. And this week, we are going to be going way back into time, to talk about one of the first ever heavy metal bands, the one and only Pentagram, from the United States of goddamn America, you son of a bitch. And they're pretty underrated. They get a little bit more attention now than they used to because there was a documentary made about Bobby Leibling, the main guy behind the band, who is an interesting character, to say the least. But more importantly, both of their major guitarists, those of course being Vincent McAllister on the demos from the 70s, and then Victor Griffin on their 80s albums and some of their 90s stuff, and both of the more recent full-lengths that they put out since I got into them. Those two guys are actually fairly under-recognized for some of the major innovations they made in guitar playing as far as heavy metal goes, and you can hear it carried down into the present through bands as diverse as Electric Wizard and Darkthrone. Surprisingly enough, Fenriz has actually mentioned the riffing styles of Pentagram being a major influence on his stuff, to the point where he did a song with Isengard on the, I want to say it's like the last track on their first album is like a straight up Pentagram worship song. He did it as a bit of a tribute to a major formative influence of his. So without any further ado, I would like to announce that I also was heavily influenced by Pentagram, and I'm going to be playing you a little bit of ye old Pentagram type shit and breaking down some of the theory behind the interesting stuff going on. So we'll start out with Vincent McAllister, who sadly passed away I think in like 2006, but he played guitar on all the 70s Pentagram recordings, and he did some really cool stuff, such as in the song Forever My Queen. So this one is pretty simple. It's the first few notes of a regular Phrygian mode thing, but then a little trick that Mr. McAllister does is he hits the same note of the root but an octave below it to give it a little bit of heaviness, and then we get into this minor scale thing with a bit of a little guitar trill there as well. So he's picking up on some of that Tony stuff, Tony Iommi shit with the trills. But the main thing that makes that track as heavy, oh god, calm down there little guy. The main thing that makes this track as heavy as it is that fact that he's hitting the note at the bottom there. He's going dun 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 dun, you know, you're hitting, it's that same note that you started out with, just an octave lower, and you're hitting that in conjunction with the regular root note of the scale. Just gives it, I don't know, I guess you could call it a pedal tone. It's sort of like a Baroque trick. Here, how does it sound when you actually play it in a Pentagram song? Well, we need to go back to, I think, this is from like 1971. This shit's early as fuck. So that's obnoxiously heavy for the time period, and it's still a pretty heavy riff today. They've actually remade this song quite a few times on a few different albums, where they increase the heaviness or add a little bit more guitar harmony, but I prefer the original version. Bobby Leibling's vocals are really cool, and also he has songwriting credits in way more songs than a typical singer would be expected to. Oh man, that's fucking dark. But I think he was a little bit more involved in the writing process than, say, like Ozzy Osbourne ever was. And there's some deliciously tasty pentatonic soloing. But one of the other major innovations that Pentagram did was around the same time as Sabbath, they started working in a little bit more narrative into their songs rather than just verse-chorus stuff, with some interesting counterpoint type shit. Witness! So they do a little bit of a riff at the end of this chorus thing where they kind of turn the song inside out. Pretty interesting. Yeah! Look out! I also like it when doom metal dudes say like look out and watch out a lot, like Ronnie James Dio or Lino from Saint Vitus or Bobby from Pentagram. It's good stuff. Elsewhere on their 70s demos, which are collected on the First Days Here and First Days Here 2 compilations, we see them getting a bit more ornate with utilizing different guitar sounds and harmonized techniques that later on would evolve into some really wacky stuff in the 80s. So kind of a lazy, drifting intro for a song appropriately titled Lazy Lady. Some cool counterpoint going on with the bass guitar there. And like, look at this. This is like Iron Maiden shit, but from like the mid-70s. Very ahead of its time. I really love this kind of 70s production. It's very nice. More cool bass shit there too. These kind of like jangly guitars that are still very heavy and metal. Interesting style there, Mr. McAllister. More cool bass playing. That was cool. And we're gonna hit a heavy riff right about now. Go! Taking sort of like Led Zeppelin shit and just heavying it up. Sucking out a little bit blues of the blues, putting in a little bit more aggression and nastiness. So overall, very influential for heavy metal. But they didn't manage to get a full length out in the 70s. They kept switching names from like Pentagram to Macabre to Sinister back and forth all over the place. Really kind of hampered their success rate. That and the fact that Bobby is a bit of a terror. Eventually Vince left. Like, he went through a whole bunch of different lineups until he settled down with Joel Hasselvander and the one and only Victor Griffin for the early 80s. He put out this album, I think it was recorded like 82, which is amazing because personally I think it sounds heavier than like the first Metallica album, so it's very ahead of its time. Just called Relentless, or just Pentagram depending on your pressing of it. One of the more notable songs off of this is the intro track, again depending on which version of it you got. It might not be your intro, but for me it's the first one. It's called Death Row, and it does this really, really, really cool thing utilizing an open string in that Vincent McAllister fashion, but Victor Griffin considerably darkens it up. Let's find out. So I'm playing it a little bit slow here so you can hear me hitting that open string pedal note in between each of the main notes, just so you can get an idea of what's going to happen, because when you speed it up, it gets considerably more messy. Like that! It's basically thrash metal for 1982, so very ahead of its time. And then this weird kind of sliding riff that utilizes minor scale stuff, but also throws in a lot of excessively dissonant notes. And then a nice kind of little minor key boogie down on the 3rd, 6th, and 7th frets there at the end. So when you put that into a song, you get this. Man, that is a nasty guitar sound. This album, it has demo level production, but it's fully complete with like 11 songs on it, so I don't know what to make of it, other than it's very dark. You gotta get an alright in there. And like those palm mutes are straight up thrash, and for 1982, that's pretty fucking amazing. So even though they are ostensibly a doom metal band, I would say they also were kind of a thrash metal band, at least on this release. Their later stuff, not so much. Interestingly enough, they also played around with a lot of black metal aesthetics for this album. They got the, you know, Anton LaVey pentagram on the front, but they also would like wear corpse paint and shit if you've seen any recordings of shows from the time period. The genre boundaries hadn't quite been ironed out yet, so people just kind of did whatever sounded good and whatever looked good. So yes, very thrashy, very nasty. Elsewhere on this album we have, lest they think we're too satanic, these guys kind of tread the line where they'll talk about Satan, they talk about God. Most of it is just about like sins and such, and just sort of like a very dark view of the world, typified by All Your Sins, which is another song where you can hear Victor Griffin doing some very interesting guitar work, wherein he takes what would normally be very dissonant intervals, like notes that are right next to each other on the neck, very chromatic scales, but manages to iron it out into very melodic stuff. How does he do that? Well, let's, you know, fuck around with my Stratocaster a little bit and show you. So if you were to just like try and put these notes out on a scale, it would be almost completely random, but somehow this man manages to arrange them in a very tuneful manner. More palm muting. And that sort of weird kind of boogie riff that also appeared in Death Row makes a reappearance on this track. And you put it all together with drums and vocals and bass and such, you get something very, very dark. This is one of the classic Pentagram tracks. They still play it live for a very good reason. Or at least they play it live when Bobby's out of rehab, which isn't that often. I can't think of any, well, not very many bands are doing anything this dark in 1982. Even Black Sabbath's sound had considerably lightened up by this point, and it was up to bands like Pentagram to carry the torch forward for very dark and spooky heavy metal music. I also enjoy the despondent vocals. So overall, Relentless is one of the essential, not just doom metal albums, but just metal albums in general. Everybody should own it. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's tremendous. You've never heard such a good album. Well, it is very good. In fact, I would say that's the Pentagram album to start with, because I knew about Pentagram for years, and like, I didn't really get their music that much until I just listened to all of Relentless in one go, and then everything clicked for me, and they've been one of my favorite bands for the better part of a decade since then. Yes. So as we move further into the 80s, we get another album. This one is called Day of Reckoning, and it's a bit of a tricky proposition, because for a while Hasselvander, the drummer, left, and they had this other dude play drums on it called Stuart Rose, who did a very good job. I enjoy the original version of this album very much. However, after he left, Hasselvander came back, and because, you know, the Hasselvander-Griffin duo was sort of like the core of Pentagram for much of their existence, motherfucker went back and re-recorded all the drum tracks. I mean, it's synced up purposely with, well, hopefully they did it on purpose. I don't know how you would do that on accident. It's synced up perfectly with the music to where you probably wouldn't notice, but it still fucking bugs me, and it especially bugs me because the only way to get this album on CD or any digital format usually is just going to be with the re-recorded drum tracks. So that's what I'm going to use. I'm sorry, Fenris, I did my best, but some motherfucker needs to like re-upload the vinyl rip of this album on high quality on the internet. I lost my copy, god damn it. Wah! But anyways, they got way more intricate with their song arrangements, doing a lot of like cool harmonies and shit, and the production isn't, I miss the rawness, but it still has a very cool kind of dark quality to it, and it's a lot easier to hear everything that's going on. This one's called Broken Vows. It was covered by, I believe, Reverend Bizarre at one point, appropriately enough. They're a very heavily Pentagram influenced band, and you can hear these harmonies going on right about now. Yeah, very cool, almost kind of cathedral-like, like an organ, but it's electric guitars. I think it's pretty neat. And despite my bitching about the drumming, of course, Hasselvander is a pretty great drummer. He was in Raven at one point as well. I think he's still with Raven, actually. And there is a classic churning doom metal riff. I think I see Bobby Leibling spooking around the background somewhere. There he is. At the end of this vocal line, there's a very cool counterpoint riff to that initial, more groovy one. Here we go! Very cool harmony on that one, too. Really cool harmonies, which they carried forward years later into the Be Forewarned album, where they got even more intense with the studio trickery and general occultic wackiness. Could have sworn I hit play. I think there's a song in here somewhere. Hello? Oh, I hear it now. There it is. Very creepy intro, especially with the kind of dissonant, diminished guitar type shit that's about to happen with that Devil's Tritone coming into effect. Almost reminds me of something you would hear on like a Trouble song. I'm not exactly sure if Trouble were heavily influenced by Pentagram or not. I think that's more of a case of convergent evolution. But this part sounds a lot like a fucking Trouble song. Until we get into a bit more of the grooving type stuff that arises from the darkness. There's another dissonant chord being utilized. Very unorthodox. And there's even a little bit of strange keyboard type shit going on. With that droning single note. And here we go. Oh, very cool little slidey riff there. I think that's why I like Pentagram, is because this is like, they'd already been around for like almost 20 years at the time this came out, and they're still doing very fresh and original material, pushing the genre forward. Then we get back into some of those harmonies of the 70s, but updated for the 90s. Very cool, dark stuff, and they put out things of uniformly good quality pretty much up until the present day. For a while in the 90s, Victor Griffin left to form his own band, Place of Skulls, that did one album with Wino from St. Vitus before kind of just becoming his own thing. And so Joe Hasselvander had to take over guitar duties as well on the excellent Review Your Choices and Sub-Basement albums. And eventually we get to the more modern day era where Victor Griffin came back. He's since left again, unfortunately. Bobby is a hard person to work with. But he did a couple albums with them, and they're both really cool. Parts of them get very bluesy and rock and rolly. They almost sound like a Spirit Caravan type thing. Another good spooky harmonized guitar intro. Harmonized? That's not a word. Harmonized, everybody. Now we get into straight up Spirit Caravan type shit. I don't know if hanging out with Wino rubbed off on Victor Griffin, or if Victor kind of always had this sort of thing inside him and he just got to blossom on these two albums. Straight up stomp along type shit that terminates into a nasty, fuzzy, harmonized lead line. And the vocals are still great. I think that's part of why Pentagram is one of my favorite bands, is they never fucking sold out or got stupid. They've just always put out consistently quality material that does new little tricks on every release to keep it from getting boring. Here comes a pretty ballsy vocal line. However, lest we think they had left the realms of the Gothic, there's plenty of that very cathedral-like build-up and breakdown type shit going on in these albums as well. Now there is some cool, and I do mean cool, very liquidy guitar work. Interesting combination with that rolling double bass from the drums. Not something you would expect. It's almost like doom metal version of a Dire Straits song or something, but very tense and obviously building up toward something considerably more nasty. Some pretty cool bar chord work here as well. Yeah, boy. That is one real headbanger of a fucking riff there, dude. And those same kind of harmonies that they dealt in the 80s are back in full force. Just very epic and moving, emotional material. So that's Pentagram in a nutshell. They have a shitload of albums. They're all really good. So, like, go out and get them, faggot.
Have a nice day.
You know I talk about busting cheeks a lot, getting your wigs split, you know, but the shit is serious, man. Yeah, they got pee-pee stains, boo-boo stains, probably skeet marks on them. This shit is not cool. No, nigga, I wasn't busting cheeks in prison. I was busting cheeks on the street. Before I got locked up, and when I got out, I was busting cheeks of women, not men. Make it clear.